Our very American Revolution was actually conservative. If you read those complaints in the Declaration of Independence, what Jefferson and all of the signers were saying, as you know very well, was that it wasn't they who were creating a new world order. It was that they had to do something to correct the problems that the king and parliament had created. And they gave, as you know, the king and parliament 3 opportunities to make amends.
Right.
And in each of those votes in Parliament, 1/3 of Parliament voted with the Americans. And on the third time, when that last olive branch petition failed, the American founders said, well, I guess it's up to us.
Let's be honest, we're all thrilled to be in a penthouse. No one ever invites us to a penthouse, so let's enjoy it. Special thanks to the Heritage Foundation for doing it, and of course for Kevin Roberts for personally handing out the invitations and inviting us down here tonight for his brand new book. He'll be on Fox and Friends tomorrow, giving us big ratings, and on my radio show, Dawn's Early Night, Taking Back Washington to Save America. And Kevin not only talks about where the country is, where it was, compares it to others, but also his personal story. And for the next 15 minutes, if it's okay with you guys, we're going to get a little preview of the book, and I'm going to try to get some answers from Kevin that helps you understand why it's going to be an instant bestseller. And also, Kevin, thanks for asking me to come down. I appreciate it and do the interview.
Thanks so much, Brian. You're the perfect person to do this.
Well, appreciate it. So, first off, when did you realize you wanted to put out a book? Around election time, you got everybody's attention, Heritage Foundation front and center. What makes this book, what makes the timing right?
Well, we didn't think we were in the news enough this year. So we decided, and I say we because at Heritage we speak with this one voice, and so even when the president of Heritage, maybe especially when the president of Heritage decides he or she's going to write a book, it's a team effort. But what we wanted to do, and mapping this out 18 months ago, was realizing however the presidential election went, the conservative movement in particular, but America writ large was going to be at a crossroads more than usual, more than the typical presidential election. And without any hubris on behalf of Heritage, we thought we have something to say about the American dream. And even beyond that, perhaps even more specifically, Brian, something you've talked about for years, Americans want to wake up in a normal country again. And so this book, by invoking this wonderful imagery, the wonderful words of Francis Scott Key, written 210 years ago, Dawn's Early Light, says that yes, we have problems, we have challenges, we have some really difficult things to overcome, but we're going to do it. And one of the reasons we're going to do it is we're going to get Washington out of the way.
Right, absolutely. So, and this is not 900 pages.
It's not 900 pages.
But it is, you do have a forward from J.D. Vance.
That is correct.
So that's great. And he's a friend of yours, and you have very similar backgrounds.
We do. We had challenging upbringings. He wrote about his in Hillbilly Elegy. I touch on mine in one of the chapters, and in particular, really lean on the example that my grandparents were. In fact, I dedicated this book to them. My mom's parents, both Marines, including my grandmother, 4'10", 95 pounds, served in the Marines in World War II. And I can tell you from firsthand experience, you did not want to mess with her. But my parents had issues. When I was 9, my 15-year-old brother took his own life in 1983, and in addition to that, my hometown of Lafayette, Louisiana was going through the oil bust. And what a lot of communities saw, what J.D. Vance saw a little bit later, is what tens of millions of Americans are facing now because of the opioid crisis. And frankly, not because of ill intention by people who want big government. I'm going to ascribe good motives there. But government has displaced the very factors that allowed me to flourish. Family, friends, communities, churches, civic organizations. You can get really academic in how you analyze that, but the purpose of this book is not to be academic, and instead to use those personal stories and the stories of other Americans to highlight the reality of what we're confronting, but also the possibility of having our best days ahead.
You know, the one thing that I got out of your book, and I'll ask you about it specifically, is, you know, you look at Kevin Roberts, go, man, this guy's got it going on. What a great life he's had, at least at the top of the heap in Washington, D.C., at the #1 think tank in D.C. with this legendary Heritage Foundation. But you're also an example of an American story. Everybody's got hurdles in their way, things to overcome. How you handle it, what you learn from it, will actually conclude what you become. And it's not you, well, this is in my way, this is a stumbling block, I guess I'm just not going to be as successful, and I'll be jealous of the person down the street, the family with the bigger house, the ones that are allowed to go on these vacations. And I think that at some point, we have to have a politician run for office and say, I can't solve all your problems, but what I can do is give you an opportunity to be successful, but I can't guarantee it and still get votes. Because I think we pander too much to voters. And the one thing, as I read your story, you did have anything but an easy upbringing. I mean, the reason why your grandparents get the book dedicated to them is because your parents didn't. And the reason is they got a divorce, that's a personal reason, but they didn't handle it well. And the kids paid a huge price, and you're one of those kids.
It's true, and I talked to both my mom and dad today. We have a great relationship. They remain divorced, but happily married to other people, and a sign of God's grace on them and on me and everyone involved. Unfortunately, my brother can't come back, but that tragedy is something that, with faith and waking up each day in the United States, told me at an early age, when I was 9, especially with my grandfather's example, that other than, of course, being sad about this tragedy, that I had everything going for me, actually. The Holy Spirit was intervening in my life. I woke up tomorrow, it was the United States. And I think it's why, Brian, as I got into being an academic historian, sitting in faculty meetings with people who hate this country, I was offended. Not for me, but for a lot of Americans who had it even worse than me, because they're waking up every day, going to blue-collar jobs, never complaining, sometimes working 2 jobs, especially in this city. And they see this country as the last best hope, not on some abstract level, but for them and for their children's children. And that's what this book is about.
Right, and it's so good because you and I share a passion for history. And we also know when you're born in America, you hit the lotto, and every day you have a chance to play in the Super Bowl, and that's all you ever want. And people don't have a perspective on that, especially if you're growing up now where you think the 1619 Project is the curriculum for America. And it's not. In fact, I interviewed 2 Democrats this week who said they were offended by it, but now suddenly feel as though they can speak up because of the disaster which just happened. But when you also pull back the curtain too, and you compare the American system to France and other revolutions, why do you think that was important to compare what we went through and what we're going through and why we're different from other countries?
Because our very American Revolution was actually conservative. Pardon me, it does happen to be my academic expertise, but I won't go all academic on you.
Coincidence?
Yeah, that's right. It was conservative because if you read those complaints in the Declaration of Independence, what Jefferson and all of the signers were saying, as you know very well, was that it wasn't they who were creating a new world order. It was that they had to do something to correct the problems that the king and parliament had created. And they gave, as you know, the king and parliament 3 opportunities to make amends.
Right.
And in each of those votes in Parliament, 1/3 of Parliament voted with the Americans. And on the third time when that last olive branch petition failed, the American founders said, well, I guess it's up to us. And you know well, when Benjamin Rush signed the Declaration, he said, he quipped to some of his other founders, he said, I, being a big man, he weighed about 300 pounds, will die quickly. But he said, some of you skinny guys are going to sit there and dangle a while. Look, it's that spirit that what we're doing here in the United States is for posterity, but it's not because we came up with a new idea. We perfected some long-standing ideas. I'm driving at a key point here, which is that we have a cultural inheritance in this country that is obscured by the Uniparty in Washington, which is...
You use that a lot in your book.
That's the antagonist.
You don't see a difference?
Say that again?
Uniparty, meaning you don't see a difference in many ways between Democrats and Republicans?
No, that's right. In fact, you might see that tomorrow when the Senate votes. The Senate Republicans vote for a leader. Nothing against John Thune or John Cornyn as people. Cornyn and I in particular are friends. But that they're representative of what's wrong in the United States. And so in this book, what I try to do is not just talk about the optimism that I have for this country, but to talk about the institutions that stand in the way. And the institution in D.C. that stands in the way is not the Democrat Party or the Republican Party or just K Street. It is this antagonist known as the Uniparty. And I got to give credit to Eric Nelson, great publisher, for helping me really understand that. Round of applause for you, sir. You're awesome.
All right.
Because he said, Kevin, you use a lot of words to explain that, but it's the Uniparty. He said, yeah, you got it. It's the Uniparty. And look, the good news is 80 million American people spoke again, and a big chunk of the others who voted for the other candidate agree with this. We're going to get them out of the way, and we're going to take the country back.
So, Kevin, if I met you in 2016, you weren't with Heritage yet, right?
That's correct. I was running Texas Public Policy Foundation.
So we know famously Ann Coulter on HBO with Bill Maher says, who do you think's going to win? They said he said Donald Trump, and they all laughed. And Barack Obama says he'll never be president. Jeb Bush says he'll never get the nomination. Where was Kevin Roberts then? Because as you know, Donald Trump will never be a classic conservative.
I was, when he nominated Mike...
Politically, I mean.
Yeah, right. And he would say that. When he nominated Mike Pence, for my wife and me as social and cultural conservatives, that was a big deal. We were voting for Trump, regardless.
By the way, he was a great man. And
he is a great man. And he was a very good vice president. And so for us, that made us very excited about voting for Trump. And then as the campaign wore on, we realized, oh my gosh, it's not Trump who's been wrong. It's us who have been wrong. And what I write about in the book is that this longtime former subscriber to the Weekly Standard, and you and I talk about foreign policy, was good at the time, but I realized peace through strength, as properly applied, means that the United States has to have its house in order first domestically, and as a couple of people who will be in Trump's administration, his second administration, have said in the last days, the American military needs to be the most lethal force in the world, hopefully the most sparingly used, authorized by Congress. If we can get back to that, we're getting back to our roots in conservative foreign policy.
And dare I say, expand the military base, because right now we don't have an industrial base. It's not the Eisenhower doctrine. Right now we don't have the industrial base, the military industrial base, to take over the country.
That's right.
Because it's too small.
And this is where J.D. Vance is so instrumental, because one of the ways we do that, and our interest at Heritage is adding and multiplying, bringing these different tribes and factions of the movement together. We can have differences of opinion, which you and I occasionally do, always as friends. I wasn't being sarcastic. But J.D. talks about an industrial policy. Now, Heritage is not whole hog on an industrial policy, but I actually think in the near term, the way you implement an industrial policy is with the defense industrial base. And that's important in its own right, but you sort of beta test, you pilot this idea of investing in communities that need the jobs, but you also, even more importantly, I would argue, in the long term, once you get that settled, you make America stronger.
It's kind of interesting because with when Washington said, I'm going to build a Navy, he spread out the contracts up and down the seaboard. He said, I'm not going to put it in one place. I want everyone working and competing with each other in order to get those 6 ships. And eventually we go and take on the Barbary pirates. But overall, when I close this book, which is a quick read, roughly 300 pages, when I close this book, what do you want people to take away?
That we have problems that we must confront. We have to be sober about them. The number one problem we're facing to restore self-governance to every American is the establishment, or as I call it, the Uniparty. And the way to break that is by electing courageous men and women to office, which we just did, but also understanding the hard work begins now. And so those of us who do policy need to spend as much time focused on policy work in state capitals and in county seats as we do in Washington. But this is the real kicker, Brian. Politics is not enough. Politics and policy will not solve this. It is all about human relationships and civil society and regenerating our local and regional institutions.
Right, and bringing back the family, and you spread it out to the community, and they become more important than who the president is.
Imagine that. The president of the Heritage Foundation is, at his core, a devotee of Edmund Burke.
Unbelievable. And I'll say this. What I think I like most about this book, it answers the question why. Like, why does America do these things? Where have we come from, and how did it happen? Where do we get off course instead of blaming, and how do we get back on? And like, for example, when it comes to free trade, it seems like a great idea, and fundamentally, no one's against it. But when you take all manufacturing out of the country, and you have a pandemic, or if you have a military that depends on China for a lot of their material, everyone says, well, how did that happen?
It happened because we took our eye off the ball, and it happened because we thought those jobs were beneath us. And in the end, we just abandoned people who wanted to do those jobs.
Free trade is a great concept, is a great theory. Heritage, of course, has been one of the great advocates for it around the world, and we will continue to be. But we don't have a free trade system right now. We don't have a free market system in the way that we want it. And what we're trying to do at Heritage, what I'm trying to do in this book is to say, to acknowledge that is the first step in correcting the problem. And one of the things that I talk about extensively, as you know, Brian, in the book, is confronting the Chinese Communist Party. You and I are both sons of the Reagan Revolution. We understood the Soviet Union was an existential threat, certainly with its nuclear capabilities it was and Russia is. But China's even more sinister. It's more insidious in what they have done under this communist regime. Of course, we should impose tariffs on them. And of course, there will be economic repercussions on the United States. But a great leader or a great generation of leaders will be able to articulate to Americans that those trade-offs are worth it. Right. Why? Because of self-governance.
And timing's everything. Right now, China, we're in a better place now for Trump to do this than we were in 2016. They are vulnerable. Their command economy is not following commands, and they are susceptible, and they need us as a market. And they're trying to bring everything back, and it's not working. 20% of their young people don't work. They don't have jobs, and they don't want to get jobs. They're having problems, and I think it's time to exploit them.
Absolutely. And by the way, I think if we zoom out 5, 10, 15 years, and we think about what we're going to be able to achieve, this is not some lip service throwaway line for the political season. This is someone who leads, I think, the best group of policy leaders there are, and some of them are here tonight. We believe this is the first phase of a golden era of conservative policy reform. And hopefully this book, which is merely a group of ideas from me and my colleagues, is a blueprint.
Okay, stay out of trouble in New York City, all right? Especially, he's going to be on Fox and Friends tomorrow, then on the radio show, and then everything else.
You know I am not a night owl, so that's really easy.
Dawn's early light. You guys know the book, Taking Back Washington to Save America. Tell a friend and make them buy it for Christmas. All right, Kevin, thanks so much for having me here today.
The Kevin Roberts Show is brought to you by more than 10 million supporters of the Heritage Foundation. The executive producer is Crystal Kate Bonham. Sound design by Lauren Evans, Mark Guiney, Tim Kennedy, and Joseph Fonsbakowski. For more information and to subscribe, please visit heritage.org.